Let's bring in David Gartenstein-Ross. He's a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and Harris Rafiq. He's a managing editor of the Quilliam Foundation. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Harris, I want to start with you. What do you think of the Jordanians' plan to try to negotiate with ISIS and get these hostages freed?
I think there's a lot of pressure from within the tribes within Jordan to actually try and get their fellow member, tribal member, actually released. So I think I can understand why a lot of pressure has been put on and why Jordan feels that they need to do something. But I think in a way that Jordan really has allowed ISIL to win this particular propaganda war. The very fact that Jordan are negotiating for the release of their prisoners by actually giving in to some demands shows that there's some legitimacy in ISIL's demands and some legitimacy in ISIL as an Islamic State almost, and also tells the world that it's okay for them to kidnap hostages because certain countries will negotiate with them. I think it's a sad day that Jordan as a country and Japan are actually negotiating with a terrorist entity.
David, we've heard this sentiment before, that somehow, even if you negotiate with ISIS, it elevates them, it elevates their position and their demands. But really, what choice does Jordan have?
That's an excellent question. One thing I'd say about Jordan's choice here is that note that ISIS hasn't said that they'd release Qasasbeh. That's what Jordan said they wanted in exchange for letting al-Rishawi, the convicted terrorist, go. But ISIS has simply said that they would free Kenji Goto. They said that Qasasbeh, the pilot, would be killed, but they never promised to release him. So there's not an agreement. In terms of negotiation and whether negotiation itself is a problem, it is, and even more problematic is the fact that you have a patchwork of some countries that negotiate with terrorist organizations who kill hostages and some countries who don't. You know, a principled stance would be, if no governments did so, then you wouldn't have these tens of millions flowing to terrorist organizations. Some do, some don't. And the countries that don't negotiate are the ones whose citizens disproportionately get killed, while the ones who do negotiate are making these organizations stronger, while they sometimes get to free their citizens.
But David and Harris, I just want to push back on that and challenge you for a moment, because you're making it sound as though ISIS are rational actors. Harris, they kidnap people because they're probably just cold-blooded opportunists. When they see someone that they can kidnap, they kidnap that person, and they don't think about the foreign policy. They kidnapped 3 U.S. citizens and killed them, even though we don't negotiate with hostages. So, I mean, we don't negotiate with terrorists. So, I mean, it seems as though we're giving them too much credit for their thinking process. Harris.
I think you're absolutely right in so much that they will kidnap people irrespective of who they are, and then what they will do is utilize that particular captive to get the maximum PR, propaganda, or in some cases money or demands met. And I think that we have to be very, very careful that we actually don't give them more credit. You're right. However, we are in a situation that by negotiating with them, as David said, we're giving them some credibility. And unless all the coalition decides to stick together and take a stance that is a collective stance, we're always going to see ISIL coming up on the media, coming up through the internet, and actually getting inches in media print and airtime on like today. But the other thing we've got one of the things we don't actually also know is that we don't actually even know if the Jordanian prisoner is actually alive. There have been some Twitter prominent IS supporters over the last few days that have actually been saying that he's been killed already. So I think there's a lot of confusion. I think that there's a lot of PR that ISIL are getting from this whole incident, and we've got to be very careful on how we handle it.
Yes, I mean, look, you've raised a great point about whether or not we should be covering this in the media. It's hard not to cover when someone's life is at stake. David, what is the answer?
Well, I think that the media coverage of ISIS does, in fact, help ISIS, by and large. And here's the major thing I think media needs to think about. Obviously, covering like something like this, it's hard not to do, and it's very much newsworthy. But ISIS is a lot weaker than a lot of media reports let on. You know, a good example is in Libya. There were multiple reports. The BBC, for example, reported this, that ISIS had actually taken over the city of Derna, which is completely untrue. But they were able to sucker a number of stations, a number of major outlets into reporting this, because they were able to tweet out a video of a parade of ISIS supporters, as well as a flag on a government building. That didn't actually prove that they took over Derna, and it's become very clear since then that they have not. But often we buy into their propaganda, and I think one thing that helps them is the perception that they're winning, which they've done a very good job of getting media to report. I think what would be helpful for media is to contextualize also their losses and ways that ISIS is actually weak and losing, because that will help to deflate their momentum, which they really do rely on.
David Harris, you've given us a lot to think about. We are having these conversations. It's great to talk to you about it as well. Thanks so much.